Well, good Sabbath, everyone. Today is Sabbath, July 2nd, 2022, and I want to welcome you warmly to this continuing study of the book of Job. And in fact, this will be part three of a three-part series. So this will be the final section that we go into today. Obviously, like with with all the Bible books, quite frankly, there's so much more that could be said, and I'm just scratching the surface in a very minor way, comparatively speaking. But I think we're getting enough of a sense of the book of Job to at least have a certain comfort level with it. And I hope that it's been eye-opening for you, as eye-opening for you as it is for me, as I go through it to prepare to teach you. I'm learning and relearning things and just blowing my mind with some of the things that I'm seeing in here. It's one of the most poetic and fascinating books of the scriptures. So I hope that you've been getting a lot out of it, and I think we'll get a little bit more today. But we're just gonna leave it at 3 sessions for now, and then we'll move on to some other things, Yahweh willing, beginning next week. So I thought what I'd do today to get things started, to kick things off, is a little bit of mixture of recap and moving forward. I want to take us to the diagram or the chart that the Bible Project has created on the book of Job. So I think it's rather fascinating. It presents a bit of a different take than, for example, what I would find in Tremper Longman and John Walton's book on how to read Job, which is a lot of the material that I've shared with you is from that book. But it's still consistent with with the things that they write in the book there. So let me bring that chart up on screen, and I'm going to take you through sections of it, and then we're just going to kind of get an overview of it, and you should see that momentarily here. All right, so he calls this Job an invitation to trust Yahweh's wisdom. I think that's spot on. I think that's right on the money, because again, the main theme of the book of Job, unlike what we've been accustomed to thinking, because we've been sort of acculturated to think this over the years, is that we think that the main reason for the book of Job's existence is to teach us about suffering, and what it means to suffer, and why we suffer, and those kind of things, and to kind of commiserate with Job. And in so commiserating with Job, then we have a better understanding of our own suffering. I believe, as these individuals who have studied the book and share their knowledge also believe, that that's an incorrect focus. Certainly suffering is an important part of the book of Job, but it's not the main or central feature of the book of Job. It's just kind of become synonymous in our culture with suffering, but that's not the main feature of Job. What's more important in the book of Job, quite frankly, is not the suffering itself, okay? What's more important in the book of Job is Job's behavior in the midst of suffering, how he reacted, and the direction in which he took his life as a result of his suffering. So Job's suffering is sort of the catalyst by which his friends come to visit him, and they spend 7 days sitting with him, and then they start to engage in this series of dialogues where they start touching upon the true salient points of the book of Job, which have to do not with suffering, but rather with Yahweh's justice or Yahweh's righteousness, right? So as I said last week, the central figure in the book of Job, in my opinion, is not really Job himself. It's Yahweh. So Job thinks that he is the defendant in a criminal trial, right? So the way that he looks at things, I'll come back to the chart in a minute. The way that he looks at things, he's thinking, okay, I'm being judged for something. I don't know what, but I'm being judged for something. And if I could only stand before my accuser, before apparently Yahweh himself, then I can somehow, justify myself. I could somehow make my case, and I can set the Almighty straight, right? And then I can explain to him that I'm suffering unjustly. And if I had that audience with him, then I could do that, and I can maybe get myself out of this situation. So his thing is not even to focus on the suffering itself, because we're not really told why he's suffering, right? We're not told. We understand because we've seen the court scenario that unfolds in the very beginning of the book of Job, and we see the challenge that's presented to Yahweh. Job, of course, knows none of this, neither do his friends. So therefore, we have the inside scoop as the audience, right? We have the inside scoop as to what's going on. And we know from the very beginning that Job is not suffering because of anything he's done, right? On the contrary, we're told that John is a righteous man. We're told that Job is a blameless man. So therefore, we know that he's right, that Job is right. He's not suffering because of some kind of bad deed that he did. But these folks don't know it. And they all subscribe to a particular worldview at the time, which actually continues to today in a different way, and it manifests itself differently because of the cultural elements, right? But back then, as it is today, there's this concept of retribution, this retribution principle or retributive justice, where you suffer as a result of the things that you do or do not do. So if you sin, the idea behind the retribution principle is if you sin, bad things are going to happen to you. If you do well, good things are going to happen to you. And as we're going to see in the book of Job, clearly frankly, it's a wrong principle. I mean, it doesn't mean that generally speaking, doing good things are going to lead to better results, right? Or doing bad things are going to lead to poorer results. So for example, you even think about the Torah, and it says, the fifth commandment says, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land, right? And I'm paraphrasing that, honor your father and your mother. Let me just give you the precise quote. Deuteronomy 5:16, honor your father and your mother, just as Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you, so that your days may be prolonged and that it may go well for you on the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, right? So the assumption is that if you do well, if you honor your father and your mother, then that's going to prolong your life. Well, is that always true? Well, we know it's not, right? Let's be honest about it. It's not always true. So it can't mean that this is just somehow a precise formula that if you do this, if you honor your father and your mother, you're going to live a long life, because we know that there are many people in history, right, that have apparently been good sons and daughters, and yet they've died a young death, right? They died at a young age. So it can't mean that as a precise formula that doing well is going to let you live long. What that verse is actually more alluding to is that if you honor your father and your mother, because of the advice that they give you, because of the way in which they bring you up, if you heed that advice, you have a much better likelihood that you're going to survive into adulthood and beyond, right? Because doing what they tell you to do, if they're righteous people, it's going to lead you to lead a better life and to do better things. But there's no formula there. There's no guarantee that it's going to lead to a long life. Same thing with Proverbs, right? People look at the book of Proverbs and they want to take everything quite literally, where they look at individual proverbs that talk about doing well and keeping your integrity, and then it leads to good things, etc. And they think that is somehow a formula to follow. And then people are disturbed when people die young, or when the good prosper. It goes, I mean, the evil prosper. It goes the other way too. You think of things like Psalm 37 and Psalm 137, where the wicked seem to prosper. How does that happen? Again, it's this idea of the retribution principle that it's gone amok, right? There's something that's not quite right about that. Well, yeah, life is not like that. Life is not fair, right? It's like M. Scott Peck said in the beginning of his work, The Road Less Traveled. Life is difficult. Yeah, right? So there's no formula there. So the retribution principle is something that we have to take a look at a little bit more closely. But the theme of the book of Job has to do with the way in which Yahweh runs the world. In other words, is justice the chief operating principle by which Yahweh operates the world? So if you think about your computer and it works on an operating system, without that operating system, it does not function, right? So you think about something like Windows, right? Windows don't work without their basic programming. And we have folks here who are better versed in computers than I am. But what I'm trying to say is that there's certain programming in the computer that if it is not there, if that structural framework is not there, your computer simply does not function. Well, Yahweh has a way in which he operates the world. And what is the basis of that operation? Is it justice? If it's justice, then presumably the retribution principle should be fairly accurate, but it isn't. So what is the truth of the matter? Well, the truth of the matter is that for all intents and purposes, from what it appears in the book of Job and other places like the book of Proverbs and even Genesis and also elsewhere throughout the scriptures, what it appears most likely is that the operating principle upon which Yahweh operates the world is on the basis of his wisdom, which is a much different place than the concept of justice. Does it mean that justice is not important? Yeah, justice certainly is important, but wisdom is the key thing, because wisdom requires that you trust in Yahweh, that you trust in his wisdom, in his knowledge, in his understanding, in his way of doing things. So we're going to look at that a little bit more closely. Let's go back to the chart and we'll look at some of this. So the book of Job, an invitation to trust Yahweh's wisdom. So it has the book set up in sections here, and I showed it with a different chart last week, but you have the first couple of chapters, which are really narrative. It's sort of a narrative framework as a prologue. And then it's the opposite bookend is chapter 42, which is where Job repents and then Yahweh restores his blessings, and it's an epilogue. And he has this designated right here on the bottom. You see that? Let me get my little pointer. So you have the prologue here, chapters 1 and 2, and the epilogue here, chapter 42, and then the meat in the sandwich, right? Those are the two ends of bread, and then the meat in the middle are chapters 3 to 37, which take into account all of the dialogues and the monologues, the dialogues and the discourses. So you have, if you look up here, you have three cycles of dialogues. So chapters 13 to 14, 15 to 21. It's actually, yeah, I don't know why they have this 13 to 14. But anyway, cycle 1, cycle 2, and cycle 3, you have 3 sets of dialogue where he goes back and forth between Job and each of his friends. Okay, and then you have after chapter 20, it's actually 22 to 27, this last cycle, and then 28 is that center of the book, that key center that I mentioned last week, and we'll talk about that separately. And then beginning with chapter 29, you have the discourses, the first discourse being Job's, which is this one here. And then you have Elihu, who is another quote unquote friend that comes into the picture, and he's down here, and that's 32 to 37. And then beginning with chapter 38, the final discourse is Yahweh himself, who speaks for himself. And then after he speaks, he sets Job straight, right? Job had intended to set him straight, but instead it's the other way around, quite obviously. And then in chapter 42 is this final epilogue, which, by the way, this chapter 42 really points all the way back to chapter 28, that central key chapter, which has the main theme of wisdom, which is the main theme, I think, of the book. So if you look here, the focus of the debate up here in the upper left, 3 things, right? Is Elohim just? Is he just? Because if he's not just, what's the point of all this, right? 2, does Elohim run the universe on the strict principle of justice, right? It's not saying is justice important. It's not saying is justice a key element to all this. Of course it is, right? Justice, righteousness. These are the things in the book of Romans that have the basis of justification and the like, right? So justice clearly is important, particularly as relates to the covenant, right? Yahweh's covenant justice. What the book of Romans in the Greek would be diakosune. I hope I'm saying that right, diakosune. And then the third thing here is, how is Job's suffering to be explained? Well, I don't agree with that, right? I don't think that's the focus of the debate. So that I have a departure here. So I would agree with Elohim just. Does Elohim run the universe on the strict principle of justice? But I don't think the third question is, how is Job's suffering to be explained? I don't think it's of any importance necessarily, except as regards that retribution principle, which if you're looking at it from that perspective, which is I think what they're doing, then yes. But I think more importantly than how is Job's suffering to be explained is, how should we behave in the midst of suffering? How should we be, maybe is a better way to put it, in the midst of suffering? Because when I say how should we behave, I don't want to imply that we should be good little boys and girls and not complain and all that, right? I made that point at the very end of last week's session, where no, complaining may be a very strong part of it, right? Matter of fact, it more than likely will be, and that's okay. And that's something that you can direct to Yahweh himself, and he welcomes it because he's our father, right? He needs to hear from us. He wants to hear from us. He wants us to share our pain with him. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So that's what I mean by how should we be? There's a right way to be in the midst of suffering, and there's a way that doesn't serve, right? And I think that all too often we go in directions that don't necessarily serve. So the book of Job helps you to understand that better. But the focus is not the suffering itself, or why did Job suffer, and that's not key. Now, if you look on the right-hand side here, you also see that Job is a unique book in the Bible, and it is. It's set in Uz, which is someplace far away from Israel. So he's not necessarily an Israelite character. All characters, in fact, are non-Israelites. There's no clear historical setting. That's true. And the point is that the author wants us to focus on the questions raised by Job's suffering. That's absolutely true. The author wants us to focus on the questions. It's less about the answers, right? It's less about the answers as to why is Job suffering? Why is the Almighty allowing Job's suffering? That's not the point. And when people focus on that, they miss the point, quite literally. It's the questions raised by Job's suffering, right? It's yes, you're going to have the frustration of suffering with no apparent reason. That's going to happen because life is not fair. Things are going to happen that way. We live in a fallen world, my friends. And when you live in a fallen world, by definition, things are not going to be in working order, because we live in a world that is not operating according to the way that Yahweh intended for it to operate. Yahweh put in place specific rules and laws, etc. And when those laws and rules are not followed, it's going to result in consequences. And it has literally rocked our world, right? The fall in the garden rocked our world. Let me switch from this to the scriptures for a minute. And I want to go to a very important scripture here. Two of them, actually. One of them, and both in the book of Romans, right? So if we go to Romans 5, beginning with verse 3, Paul is speaking about our human condition, right? And he says, let's start with verse 1 just for context. So Romans 5, verse 1, therefore, and hopefully you can see that, therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with Elohim through our sovereign Yahshua Messiah, through whom also we have obtained our introduction by faith into his grace in which we stand. So we stand in Yahweh's grace. We stand in his unmerited favor and kindness because of the sacrifice of Yahshua Messiah. And we exult in hope of the glory of Elohim. So that's our hope, right? Our hope is eventually to enjoy the glory of Yahweh. What is the glory of Yahweh? Well, the glory of Yahweh, glory has to do with presence, right? It's Yahweh's presence in the midst of the earth. It's Yahweh filling the earth with his presence. This is what our hope is. It's the hope of new creation, which is what this is all about, right? We are waiting for the renewal of creation. The renewal of creation, the primary activity of which is evidence of that is the resurrection, right? So the resurrection is going to be the key event in the life of humanity leading towards the new creation. More important than the reorganization of the environment and the climate and everything else is our own, right? As human beings, our own reorganization, our own rejuvenation. This is what we're waiting for. That's what the resurrection is all about. Our reward in our service to Yahweh is not, dying and then going off to heaven in some ethereal bodily not bodily, but in some sort of, like I said, ethereal, presence, non-bodily presence. That's not what the scripture shows. The scripture shows that the reward of the reward of the just, the reward of the righteous is here on the earth. The meek shall inherit the earth, right? But it's going to be a renewed earth. It's going to be a rejuvenated earth, an invigorated earth to its fullest beautification that Yahweh intended. The entire earth like the Eden of old, right? So resurrection is the great evidence of that renewal of creation. And so it starts with the rejuvenation of humanity, of humankind, and it culminates in the entire earth being restored. So he says we're waiting for this in verse 3, Romans 5. And not only this, but we also exult in our tribulations. I'm going to put this in a more modern translation, right? So I'm going to go over to the NIV because I think it may be a little bit easier to see this in a more modern translation. So so we boast in the hope of the glory of Elohim. Not only so, verse 3, but we also glory in our sufferings. We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame because Yahweh's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, which has been given to us, right? The suffering that we go through is part of the deal, is what I'm saying. Nobody likes suffering, right? Nobody likes to go through pain and suffering. But the suffering, please understand, if you're suffering, unlike what the retribution principle will tell you, going through suffering is not necessarily it's not necessarily a evidence of what you're doing wrong. It could be evidence of what you're doing right. Am I saying that we never suffer the consequences of our actions and our sins and all that produces suffering? Of course, I'm not saying that. Sometimes that will happen, right? If you're, suffering physical ailments and problems because you've been an habitual alcohol abuser or drug abuser or what have you, or if you're suffering mental health issues because you've been behaving in ways that are inappropriate in accordance with the word of Yahweh, etc. If your relationships are suffering and falling apart because you haven't, right? Of course, there's going to be an element of your own personal responsibility in that, but that's not always what suffering is about. And that's key to understanding the book of Job. And it's key to taking a certain level of comfort in our existence because we all suffer. And instead of sitting there every time that you go through something, instead of sitting there wringing your hands and wondering, what did I do to deserve this? Or why am I suffering if I'm doing what's right? That's not a productive use of your time. That's really a waste of time and effort and energy because it's not about that. It's about, it could be a number of things. And one of the key things is that because we live in a fallen world, we're going to suffer. It's inevitable. Right? Suffering is inevitable. Now, I've expressed things differently. Like I said, pain is what is the expression I've used? Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. That's in a different context, right? In other words, thank you. When I'm using it in that context, as I have in the past, and I will still use that in the future, that's not inconsistent with what I'm saying now, because I'm not talking about the suffering itself. I'm talking about the mental anguish part of the suffering, that we're all going to go through pain in life, but suffering is optional because in that context of mental health, that suffering is not the actual thing you're going through. That suffering is the mental anguish that we go through. So maybe we should come up with a better word to distinguish the two. So I don't want you to get confused with that and think I'm being inconsistent. In that sense, suffering is optional because in that sense, suffering occurs because you think that you're powerless to deal with the painful issues in your life, and you're not powerless. It's that sense of powerlessness and a lack of control that causes you to suffer here mentally, okay? That's a different discussion. That's a mental health discussion. But in the context of just actual suffering, right, that is inevitable. It's inevitable because if you look at the book of Romans here, it tells you that it's inevitable. It tells you that that's part and parcel of what we're going to experience. And it's part of the growth and of the maturation of those who serve Yahweh, of all humanity, right? Not only so, but we also glory. Now, we glory in our sufferings. All of humanity doesn't do it because they don't all know Yahweh. But that's what we're trying to help people to understand, right? That suffering's part of the deal. Don't sit there wringing your hands. Do something about it. Flow with it instead of deteriorate and fall apart before it. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, etc. So what is all this about? Well, perhaps a better place to see this is Romans 8, beginning with verse 18. And let me stay in the NIV version here. So I want to make sure you understand the kernel of this idea, and then we'll bring it back to Job. Romans 8:18, for I consider, Paul, that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. In other words, yes, we're suffering. There's no denial there, right? He fully admits we're suffering, but he's saying that the things that we're suffering now can't even, the intensity and the magnitude of them can't even be compared to the good stuff that awaits us, the glory that is to be revealed to us. Then he goes on to further explain, for the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of Elohim. What is that? The anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of Elohim. That's what I was just describing a few minutes ago. That's the longing of new creation. That's what we're waiting for anxiously with bated breath. All of creation, right? It's like it's personifying creation. All of creation is waiting with bated breath for the revealing of the sons of Elohim. That's you, that's me. In other words, it's waiting for that period of resurrection that's going to be the point at which all of new creation is going to flourish. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of Elohim. Okay, so that takes some explanation and some unpacking, which I don't have time to do now. But essentially, it's saying that creation was put into slavery in the fall, right? In the fall of humanity, the entire creation was put into chaos, okay? And slavery to the corruption of the consequences of a fall. Verse 22, for we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. It's interesting, the pains of childbirth. What do the pains of childbirth signify? That there's a child on the way, right? So the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now, until the present, and it's going to continue until Yahshua returns. So the pains of childbirth, if you're just looking at the pain, then yeah, it's easy to despair, yes? Because you're saying to yourself, all I feel is this terrible pain. And you know what? I'm a man. I will never know what it's like to have the pain of childbirth, but I hear it's pretty bad, right? So if all you have to look forward to is that pretty bad feeling of the pain of childbirth, then yeah, you'd be in a pretty serious mess, and there wouldn't be a whole lot to celebrate. But that's not what ultimately is in store for us. It's what's beyond the pain of childbirth. It's the birth itself, right? It's the renewal itself in this case. For we know the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves, humanity, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. What is that? That's new creation, resurrection, new body. The old is done away, we take on the new. For in hope, the corruptible is put off and the incorruptible overtakes it, right? For in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope, etc., etc. Okay, if we hope what we do not see, with perseverance we wait eagerly for it. So there's a purpose for all the suffering that we're going through, and in many of the writings of the New Testament, you're going to see that suffering is a part of it, right? Paul, he talks about, being stoned and being, spit at and being shipwrecked and everything else, right? It just seems to go hand in hand with being a believer. It's the darkness before the light. Okay. So when you now bring this back to the book of Job and this whole concept of the retribution principle, we don't always understand what the suffering is about, at least to a certain extent, broadly speaking, thanks to passages like Romans 8, etc. And if you look at the Psalms, you see it as well. We understand at least a little bit of the reasons why we suffer. But you don't need to look to the book of Job for the reasons why we suffer. We know why we suffer in a broad sense. And it's ultimately, the suffering itself is unimportant. What is important is to understand the hope that we have in the future. And why do we have the hope? Paul says that we're waiting. The creation waits eagerly, right? It says that we, humanity, we human beings, we wait eagerly for our adoption, etc. What does that waiting imply? When you're waiting for something, what does that imply? When you're hoping for something, what does that imply? It implies trust. It implies trust. We trust in Yahweh. We trust in his wisdom. We trust that in his overall plan, whatever that plan is, that he knows what he's doing, that he's in control, that ultimately, even though it escapes our understanding in every given moment, we know that Yahweh himself is in control. And that, my friends, is the central concept that's being brought forth in the book of Job. Let's go back to that chart for just a few minutes here. So throughout these arguments with his friends, Job is protesting, and he's on this emotional roller coaster, right? Why has Elohim denied me justice and made my life bitter? Elohim attacks 27:2. Elohim attacks me. He tears me up in anger and gnashes his teeth at me. 16:9. He destroys the blameless and the wicked. He mocks the despair of the innocent. Right? He doesn't destroy just the blameless and the wicked, but he mocks the innocent who are despairing. Is that really true? Not really, right? But that's what Job is feeling. That's 9:22-23. And then 27:8. What hope do the wicked have when Elohim takes away their life? And on he goes. So by the time we get to his monologue, his discourse in 29-31, he's asserting his innocence again. He's demanding an explanation. And this is the interesting part. He's demanding an explanation from Elohim. He says, I sign my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. 31-35. And then that's when Elihu comes in and he puts his foot in his mouth, right? So what Job is complaining, right? And he's putting it all, laying it all out there. And is what's Job doing? Well, Job is doing what we all do, right? Job, he wants to be, perhaps it's an extreme example, but let's not lie to ourselves. Don't we have the same attitudes that Job had? We question in our hearts. We don't want to necessarily articulate it because we kind of gingerly, tiptoe around that. But let's face it, all of us at some time in our life going through the things that we do, we question and we ask, why are we going through this? I don't understand. I try to, I keep the Sabbath and I keep the dietary laws. I try to be nice to people, right? We go through the list in our minds and we start counting, and we seem to, we're trying to weigh everything in the balance, just like Job and his friends did. There's nothing new under the sun. Culturally, we're different today, right? We don't live under the same culture of the ancient Near East, but nevertheless, humanity does what it does. And I'm here to tell you that questioning, that intensity of emotion that's directed towards Yahweh and all that, while not ideal, it's okay. In fact, it's even welcomed. Job's problem was not that he got emotional with Yahweh, right? And that he started questioning and throwing stuff out. This is a man in pain. Right? Well, I often tell people after, hearing this from Chuck Swindoll years ago, we're really hard on Job's wife, right? Job tells him, curse Elohim and die. Now, that wasn't a nice thing to say, right? But this is a woman who just lost 10 of her children in one fell swoop, right? She just lost 10 of her children and all her possessions and all the, right? Maybe Job, with his level of faith, could take that, but she couldn't take that. And people are different, right? She had a different way of looking at it. We have no basis upon which to judge her spiritual character. This was a woman in pain, talking in pain and speaking the words of pain. It's always important to remember that when people are in grief, that there's a difference between what the heart is saying and what the head is saying, right? The head is speaking with the intellect, and the heart is speaking with emotion. So when a woman says to Job, when this woman says to Job, curse Elohim and die, she's not speaking with her head. She's speaking with her heart, right? And we have to learn how to give her some slack for that, because I've never lost my children by the grace of Yahweh. I don't know about you, right? We each have had our own thing. I know about the ones who are here, but I don't know, right? Or you think about anybody that you've lost. It's painful to lose anybody. I can't even imagine what it would be like to lose children. Can't even imagine. So this is a woman who's speaking with, with the pain of grief and mourning, and Job is too, but he's doing it in his way. And by the time he gets to the point where he's really letting it out, this is after his friends are there accusing him, right? So on top of injury, it's the insult that also comes on top of him. I mean, they're going at him. They're really doing a job on him, doing a number. I mean, it's apparently with good intentions, but it's not really good, right? I mean, they are so, like so many people, so many so-called religious people who consider themselves religious, they're so interested in winning the argument that they're not thinking about the man. You ever experienced that in your religious life with people? I have many times. It isn't pleasant, right? You just want to tell people, shut up and go away. They want to win the argument. They want to justify. They want to do apologetics at the moment. You don't need to do apologetics to a person who's grieving and in severe pain. You want to just listen and receive them in their heart. And that's not the time to defend religious principles. There is a time for that. That's not it. But yet that's what they're doing. And they're wrong about it too. How do I know they're wrong? Because Yahweh says they're wrong. He says, you did not speak the truth to me, right? About me at the end there, right? You want to see that? Job 42:7. It came about after Yahweh had spoken these words to Job that Yahweh said to Eliphaz, the Temanite, who's sort of the ringleader, my wrath is kindled against you. That means I'm pretty angry at you, right? My wrath is kindled against you. That's very strong terminology. My wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends because you have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. They weren't right. So we need to take that to heart. When religious people want to get all self-righteous and they want to, tell you about what you do or do not feel about Yahweh, we need to remember that they don't have the corner on that. And you got to remember these guys. And by the way, notice who's not even mentioned in all this. Elihu, right? Job, when Elihu does his thing, unlike with the other three, Job doesn't respond to Elihu, and Yahweh doesn't mention him either, right? So, when he's talking to Eliphaz, notice he says, you and your two friends, right? He doesn't even mention Elihu. Elihu is almost like dismissed, like an afterthought, right? Because Elihu really doesn't give a different argument than the three friends. He's a blowhard. You can see that. And maybe that's purposeful in the way that the writer wrote it. Remember, as I was reading it last week, I was explaining, wow, this guy's really presumptuous, and he's really blowing it. He's a blowfish, this guy. And I would talk and I would set you guys straight, and I would this and blah, blah, and just ask me and I'll tell you everything, right? He's obviously a younger guy, and he thinks he knows everything. And they all it's like they dismiss him. They kind of ignore him, right? It's like Tremper Longman says in an interview one time, he says, Elihu is like, a guy at a party who burps and everyone just kind of politely ignores him, right? That's it. Because he doesn't really offer anything new to the discussion. What he's saying, Elihu, by the way, when he finally does make his point, this big point, it's like he's building up. We're all thinking, oh, wonderful. Now you have the answer. You're going to give it to us. And then his thing is like, really? That's it? That's the answer you have? His answer is essentially the same as the other guys, except he's not talking about Job's past sins. He's saying, no. Elohim is making you suffer to prevent you from doing future sins, because he knows, that you have intent in your heart for the future, and he wants to keep you. And it's kind of a caution Job, put on the brakes before you, and it's not true. Again, he's also trying to defend this retribution principle. Let's go over to that chart for a minute, because I want to explain that a little bit better. So this is the chart I was sharing with you from the book How to Read Job. And it's a triangle, and they call it the triangle of tensions. I like that. So 3 corners, retribution principle, Job's righteousness, and Yahweh's justice, right? When you look at the 3 friends, by the way, as long as all these 3 things are balanced, we're good, right? Because hey, the world is, well, everyone, that's the problem. Everyone wants to have a neat little, everything has to be neat, all the corners tucked in, right? Life doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work with all the three corners neatly tucked in. That's not how life operates. So as long as the just get nice things and the unjust get bad things, retribution principle is working. Check. Elohim's justice, just Elohim in control, check. And the person's righteousness, they're doing good. Everything good is happening to them. They're doing bad. Bad things happen to them. All is right with the world. But what happens when one of those things falls out of whack? The retribution principle all of a sudden doesn't seem to be working, right? Job, a supposedly righteous man, and everybody knew Job, character, right? And his character, good moral character, integrity, etc. All of a sudden, things start going pretty horribly, right? It's not just one, he didn't just stub his toe, right? He had some pretty serious stuff happen to him, and seemingly overnight, he's done for. So that when something that tragic and that intense happens, well, people start, they're letting their minds go wander, right? I know people that, someone will a family will get into an accident or something, and oh, they're already talking about some secret sin that they've done. I'm thinking, shut up. Who are you to think? Or someone becomes ill all of a sudden, or someone gets into legal trouble or whatever. Shut up. You don't know what's going on in that person's life. So yeah, I'm going to be blunt about that. Just shut up. You don't want people judging you that way. Don't judge other people that way either. No one died and left you, boss. But this is what happens, right? This retribution principle, it implies that, well, Elohim's justice, he's always going to be just. So the retribution principle is going to be at work. And that's what these friends implied, and Elihu as well. Well, the retribution principle, they're going to hold on to that for dear life. Even if it doesn't seem to be consistent with what life is actually doing, they're going to hold on to it for dear life because it's a reaction of fear, right? Because it's something that's familiar to them, right? It's familiar. Yeah, somebody pointed out that today's called the prosperity gospel. Well, partly, right? That's part of it. The prosperity gospel is the idea that, hey, if you give for this if you do great things are going to happen to you. And one great way that you can show that you're good is that you can send in a contribution right now, right? How convenient. Yeah. So this retribution principle has caused so much pain because people will cling to it because it gives them a sense that the world is under control and that everything is under control, and people like that, right? We like to know that that things are under control. If we're suffering and we're suffering for a reason, right? Presumably that makes the suffering easier. It doesn't really, right? But there's a mental limiting belief that says, yeah, this suffering is easier because I can make sense of the world. But what happens when you can't make sense of the world? Does that mean that all is lost or that Yahweh's not in control? No. Or does it mean, as I said before, that there is in fact sin and everything else? No, not necessarily. But we want a reason. Everything has to happen for a reason that we can explain readily to ourselves, because it's too fearful to be uncertain, to not know from where something is coming. And that's precisely the point of Yahweh and his wisdom and trusting in him. That's where the trust becomes more important, especially when you cannot understand why something is happening, especially like all of creation, waiting, longing for things to be, for the right to be made, for the wrong to be made right, right? So let's go back to the chart. So the friends, they're saying, okay, well, the retribution principle, they don't refer to it like that, of course, but the principles, they articulate them in their words, or the consequences of the retribution principle as defined by the retribution principle in their words. And well, Elohim's justice is perfect. So therefore, well, the problem's got to be you, Job. And they go through all kinds of machinations to make sure that Job understands, hey, dude, you got to repent, because obviously you've done something pretty terrible, or these things wouldn't be happening. Because for that not to be true, that would mean one of these other things is wrong, and that's absolutely not going to happen. So it must be you, Job. And then Job, for his part, and by the way, Elihu later, same thing, but from a different angle. Job is different, right? Job, interestingly, though, he is different and he's not. He's different in the sense that he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm doing just fine. I've been blameless all my life. And There's no way, no way that that I'm the cause of this. No way that that I'm imbalancing this triangle, because he also believes, and that's the interesting thing, that Yahweh's justice is strong and is accurate and truthful. But he also believes in the retribution principle. Why wouldn't he? That's the viewpoint of the Near East at that time. And today, most people believe in that too. That's the commonly accepted view. So, okay, right? You do good, you get good. You do bad, you get bad. That's how it works. So Job is saying, okay, so I believe strongly in this retribution principle. I'm doing fine. That leaves only one other option. Aha. I have a feeling that it's this. I hate to admit it, but it must mean that Elohim is not just. That there's something wrong with Elohim's justice. Elohim is unfair. Yahweh is unfair. That's what he comes to a conclusion in his words. And you could see the conflict, right? As I read through it, I hope that you saw that. As I read through it, you could see that he complains, right? He kind of gripes and he rages out, and then you see like him pulling back, right? Oh, if only Elohim would hear me. If only I could make my case. I don't understand, because he does this to the righteous and he does this to the wicked, and he takes care of this and he takes care of the widow and the orphan. And on and on, right? I'm using this paraphrasing these words. It's that you see like almost like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, right? Where he's on the one hand, he's like, when he gets those moments, we call it in a modern day, we call it in coaching circles a crazy eight, right? He's in the middle of a really deep crazy eight. Crazy eight. If you imagine a letter 8, hello, okay, it's like a number 8. 8 is a number. If you imagine the number 8 and then you put it on its side, that's a crazy 8. It's kind of like an infinity sign, right? And the way it works as someone like Tony Robbins explains it, is like the one side represents the sad types of feelings that you get, and the other side represents the angry type feelings that you get. So sad can be everything from, mildly sad to depressed. And then everything on the right-hand side, the anger part, is everything from mildly annoyed or irritated to enraged, right? And what happens is that depending on your personality, and we all go through this, but we tend to live more on one side than the other. Some of us get very sad when we're having trouble, and others of us get very angry. You know for yourself how that works. Some of us live there. We always go through both those sides, and that's what the crazy eight implies. It's a cycle, right? You're kind of cycling, if you picture it, between sad feelings and angry feelings. So if you're sad for a long time and nobody cares, nobody loves me, no one understands what I'm going through, etc. And after a while, it's too exhausting to think that way. So all of a sudden, your mind turns to anger, right? It just kind of goes there. It's like, oh, I'm sick of feeling this way. And then you go and you start, right? And now you're in the anger side. So you kind of flip to the other side and you're raging, and nobody is I don't understand why this happened. Blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, after a few hours of doing that or a couple of days of doing that, then right, then it's like you can't stay in that state forever, because it's too much effort and too much energy. So what happens? At some point, you get exhausted, and then your adrenaline crashes, and now you're back to sadness. And now it's no use. It's no use raging and everything. It's nobody's going to hear me anyway, and nobody cares, and I'm just always, I'm the martyr, and blah blah blah. Yeah, and so it goes, a cycle back and forth. Job is in the middle of this. You could see it plain as day in his words. He's raging, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh, woe is me, right? And I'm not saying that to mock the man. I'm saying that's us, right? That's how we do things as human beings. He's going back and forth, but ultimately, what he's concluding is because he doesn't understand, is so much energy being expended to try to figure out what's going on here. How can this triangle, in other words, right? Put it another way, how can this triangle be so out of whack? I know I'm not doing something wrong, and I know the good prosper and the evil. So I don't understand it. So you have to have an answer. We human beings have to have an answer, especially men. We got to fix it, right? We have to fix things. And the only way for him to fix this is to go to the other end of only end of the triangle. He's going to use logic. That's what men do, right? Especially they got to go to logic. Logic is not always the answer, men. Sometimes sitting in the emotion is the answer. And I'm not saying women do that exclusively, but they're better at it than we are. And you know what? That sounds sexist in this day and age. So be it. I believe it's true. Women do emotions better than men. We all do it, but we all do it in different ways. And men want to fix everything. Everything is a logic thing with men. They don't know how to sit in the emotion. So he's trying to find logic to deal with this issue that he's going through in life, this terrible crisis, right? It's not a light thing. It's a terrible crisis. So the only logic he can come up with is Elohim is the problem. He's not just. He's not fair. So what's the solution? Well, the solution for the friends, right? I always feel uncomfortable using that term friends because, I don't know. But anyway, the friends, their solution is, Job, you got to repent, right? You gotta step back and admit you're wrong. Admit your wrongdoing so that Yahweh can start to restore you again. And Job is like, what are you talking about? Just go away. But Job, his solution is, I'm going to confront Elohim. I want my day in court. I'm going to meet him where he lives, and I'm gonna explain to him. Get the presumption of this, right? This is only an emotionally charged person can do this silliness, right? Because now his emotion and his intellect are disconnected from one another. That's why it's worthless to try to do apologetics with people who are in grief, because they're not making those kind of connections. They know, they have a faith, right? They know that Yahweh is in control and everything else. So to hear something like that in the midst of their grief is like pouring salt on a wound. Don't do that, right? Let their grief have its course. And Job is tumbling back and forth. He's going through this crazy eight thing, and he's not speaking from a good intellect, right? He's trying to make intellectual decisions with his heart, and it's not working, and it's coming out very poorly, which is why Yahweh looks at that and he doesn't chide Job for it. It's interesting in that same chapter 42, where Yahweh tells Eliphaz, you didn't speak the truth about me. What does he say? Like my servant Job did. Well, Job was saying he was talking a lot of trash, right? He was throwing shade towards the Almighty. So he wasn't saying everything right. He's not saying that everything that Job said was right, but he reckoned there's an implication in there that the stuff that was coming at me was just Job dumping on me. He was downloading, right? He was dumping his emotion and his grief. And I'm okay with that. The part that Yahweh didn't like, and he didn't appreciate, was that Job tried to take him to task, right? To take him to court, to question his justice, as if he knew something that Yahweh didn't. That's the part that offended maybe too strong a term, but that's the part that I believe that Yahweh was displeased with Job, where he had to put him in place. But it's like he said, in essence, when you look at all those chapters together, it's like he's saying to Job, I get that you're angry, I get that you're upset, it's okay, I could take it, etc. But you need to back off on this point. Right, you need to back off on this point, and you see that over in because he tells him, he reads him the riot act, right, and he tells him, where were you when this happened and this happened? What is the point of all that? Where are you when this happened and when I created this, etc. And did you do this for the animals, etc. Right? What is he telling him? He's telling you have at best partial information. So if you're trying to discern something as deep as how I run the world, you're out of your league. All of you are. You're out of your league. If you think that you can presume to understand all the complexities that are involved in running the world, you're out of your mind, and you need to back off. This is essentially what he's telling Job, right? Here, this is 40 verse 6. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the storm and said, now gird up your loins like a man. And by the way, this is after Job's starting to soften, right? After the first things that he said, were you there when I did this and this and this and this? Job, you have at best partial information. You don't know everything as much as you think you know to bring a case against me. Then Job, 40 verse 1, then Yahweh said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves Elohim answer it. See, it's interesting. So there's this little exchange here before Yahweh finishes his thoughts. Then Yahweh said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? You're finding fault with me. You're going to contend with me? Let him who reproves Elohim, in other words, you, Job, let him who reproves Elohim answer it. Answer me. If you know all these things, if you know as much as you think you do, go ahead and answer me, you see. This is how a father would talk to a child, right? Oh, you think you know everything, do you? Go ahead. Here, go ahead. Bring it on. Tell me. Right. Go ahead. Here's a piece of paper. Write down everything that I don't know. Tell me everything I don't know. Then Job answered Yahweh and said, behold, I am insignificant. Job had the right response here, right? I'm insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. What can I say? I got to shut up. Once I've spoken, I will not answer. Even twice, and I will add nothing more. I've already spoken too much, in other words. I spoke once, I'm not going to answer. I spoke once and I shouldn't have. I spoke a second time in my arrogance, in other words, and I'm not going to add anything more. I've already said too much. What more am I going to say? So he already, and then Yahweh continues, kind of like the father would do with the child, right? Because the child kind of, because you start seeing the repentance coming in and you want to drive the point home. And then the father says, see, now let me explain to you why you don't know as much as you think you know. And then he continues to speak. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the storm and said, now, no, gird up your loins like a man. Come on. You said you wanted your day in court. Be careful what you wish for. Here we go. Here's your day in court. Go ahead and tell me go ahead and explain to me what I don't know about justice and what I don't know about running the world. I will ask you and you instruct me. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Or do you have an arm like Elohim and can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with eminence and dignity. Clothe yourself with honor and majesty, and on and on. Then he starts talking about behemoth, and we can debate from here till tomorrow about what behemoth was. Was it an animal that's being described, or was it some ancient sea creature that's no longer in existence because it went extinct, or we don't know. But the point is that whatever behemoth and leviathan are, what they represent are disorder and chaos, right? And he's speaking about, and whatever they were, they represent not disorder and chaos, I'm sorry, danger. They represent danger, things that are dangerous, okay? That are too mighty to be understood. Okay, behemoth, he's got strength in his loins. He bends his tail like a cedar. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of Elohim. Yahweh's not blasting these things. He's actually quite proud of them, behemoth and leviathan, because he created them, right? But he's saying they're dangerous. They're uncontrollable. I control them because you know what? I'm the one that's dangerous, right? They're dangerous, but I'm the one who made them. So respect me. If you respect them and what you've heard about them, respect me even more because I'm the one who made them. Can you draw out Leviathan with the fish hook and on and on? Could he make a covenant with you? It's great. It's beautiful poetry. And he goes on. And then finally Job is like, so this is like rebuke upon rebuke. And then Job, because he deserved it, because he brought things to a point where he said, I'm the big prosecutor. I'm gonna put Elohim into court. And Yahweh said, not so fast. Okay, Job, I know you're angry. I know you're upset, right? And sometimes if you ever had children, right? Those who have children, you know that the child will, I hate you, and they'll slam doors and blah, 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 right? But then when they get to a point where they start really being insulting, then at that point, so you're listening to them and you understand that children are going to do that, right? Because children are upset and they're going to, they don't know how to control their emotions yet. So they're kind of just going off, and you let them, there's a certain level of tolerance to that. But at some point they start saying stuff, they start crossing into areas where they become really offensive. And at that point you can say, okay, stop right there. You ever done that before? Stop right there. And this is how I see this entire conversation between Yahweh and Job. It's like a father speaking with his misguided son. And he says, okay, Job, I've been listening to you. All right, we'd say for chapter upon chapter, and I've been hearing you go off, and I see your emotion, and I hear it, and I feel what you're going through, and all that stuff, and I understand. And yes, it's fine that you bring all that to me. I'm Elohim. I can take it. I understand that you're in pain. But then when he starts questioning his judgment, and then on top of that, going a step further and saying, okay, I'm going to put you in. I'm gonna bring a case against you. Then he's no, stop right there. And that's when he answers him. Okay, so when you go back to that triangle, yeah, Yahweh is just, and Yahweh, and the problem is that we don't have the capacity to fully understand Yahweh's justice, nor should we try. And this is the part where last week I got a little bit peaked about it, and as I was speaking about it, because I think about how this world is, and I think about how they're always questioning Yahweh with the presumption, the utter presumption of humanity to the way they speak of what they do not know. It's like Job, who recognized, I put my hand on my mouth, but most people in our day and age simply do not think that way. They think that we're it, right? Because with evolution, we are the greatest things in Swiss cheese. We're the peak the pinnacle of creation, and there is no creator. So therefore, so that, like, people always refer, I'll see that so many times in writing. I just saw it the other day, that some big guy in the sky, well, these infantile ways of looking at the Almighty. That, yeah, if that's the way the Almighty really was, I'd see it that way too. But he's not. Right? They speak of what, like Job says, I spoke of what I did not know. And people today speak of what they do not know, not even remotely. People will quote the Bible, or I should say misquote the Bible, to prove things or disprove things. And they simply do not know. It's ignorance to an extraordinary level, but yet they judge Elohim. Right? At least Job was a righteous man who could say, okay, right, I'm righteous. But most people today, they just do whatever they want to do. And, and I'm not talking about, the average person, I'm talking about, the people who rage against Elohim, right? Because we all, as humanity, we all are at different levels of our spirituality and all that. But there's a very arrogant attitude in the world today where people, they think that they know better than the Almighty, and it shows. And it comes out in people's speech patterns and the way that they look at things. And it's deeply offensive. It should be deeply offensive to people who believe in Elohim, because it's so misguided and it's so ignorant and it's so not true, right? So that presumption, Job is engaging in that type of presumption with that particular point, and it's a huge one. And Yahweh has to put a stop to it and say, no, that's not the case. So with regard to with regard to this entire triangle of tensions, the whole thing, it still works. I mean, Yahweh's justice is not dependent. It's the retribution principle is really the problem here, right? It works in the sense that in a general sense, if you do good, good will happen, and if you do evil, evil will happen. But it's not the way this retribution principle identifies. So really, this triangle is wrong, right? There should be something else here. We're not going to figure that out right now. But as this is a flawed model here that you're seeing here. It's a flawed model because of the retribution principle. Okay, Yahweh's justice is true and it's sure, and it's much more complicated and complex than any of us can figure out. And this is what Yahweh's saying to Job in those final chapters there. Let me give you an example, right? So if you go to the scriptures, if you go to a place like John chapter 9, you may remember this story. Let's see. John 9:1. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, this is his disciples who had been with him and who knew better, right? His own disciples still are not understanding, right? And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? What is that? That's retribution principle. That's the way the world thinks, right? If you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. Or maybe it wasn't you directly. Maybe it was your parents, and therefore you're suffering the consequences. So that's why you go to something like Ezekiel that talks about, again, I'm paraphrasing, is the child going to pay for the sins of the parent or the fathers, right? Yahshua answered, it was neither. They're looking for a neat, tuck in the corners, tie that bow, right? Because if you could say, well, it was him, he sinned and therefore he became blind, or if you could say, his parents were terrible people and Yahweh said, here, now you're gonna have to deal with a blind son. We look at that and we want to see the twisted nature of that way of thinking, but we do it ourselves. We judge ourselves and we say, well, what we're going through is good for us. We deserve it because I deserve it because I didn't tithe. So now I'm falling apart economically. It's because I didn't tithe. And people will agree with you, right? You'll find plenty of people to agree with you. Yeah, you everything's falling apart. And they'll even give you chapter and verse, literally, right? Oh, let me give you Malachi, 3 verse 10 and bringing the tithes and whatever. And if you don't obey that and things are going wrong, well, you figure it out, right? But that's the kind of infantile thinking that a spiritual thinking, infantile spiritual thinking that gets people into trouble, that creates all kinds of guilt and shame and everything else. Now, am I saying that we shouldn't be doing what the scripture says? Of course not. Of course we should be doing what the scripture says. Are things going to sometimes go badly for us if we don't follow what the scripture? Of course they are. That's why though it's as sure as night is day. If you're not obeying the scriptures morally, for example, right? If you're sleeping around and doing all kinds of, things that you shouldn't be doing, and you get a disease, well, I mean, put two and two together. Is that necessarily judgment from on high, or is that just the natural consequence of your actions? If you're, if you're abusing alcohol for 30 years and all of a sudden you get a liver disease, is that Yahweh saying, push, you got your disease now because you were drinking for 30 years? No, it's 30 years of hardening your liver. If you're smoking for 30 years and all of a sudden you develop lung cancer, is that because Yahweh finally decided, this is the day, boom, there's your lung cancer for you. Now eat that so that you can, I'm using this strong terminology because that's how people think, that Yahweh is vindictive, and that he does things to us, he does things to us out of vindictiveness and like, oh, I'm finally fed up with you and boom, right? No. So if you get your lung disease, it's because there's natural laws in place that say that after 3 decades of smoking, chain smoking cigarettes every day for 30 years, yeah, it's going to affect your lungs. And on and on we could go. Are there instances, because I know there's always going to be, not you guys, but is there always going to be someone out there that's going to say, well, look at the scriptures and this particular thing that happened? Yeah, you're going to find exceptions to every rule. But is that what you're going to base your whole doctrine of the Almighty on? On the exceptions or specific illustrations and examples that Yahweh gave for a particular purpose that's not the purpose you think it is? So when you look at something like this is, to me, immediately shoots that idea out of the water. Because it's the same thing that people do today. Who was it? This guy that sinned, or his parents? And Yahshua said, neither. It was neither that this man sinned. Why are you presuming that it was either him or his parents? It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of Elohim might be displayed in him, so that you could see the glory of Yahweh. So that the works of Elohim might be displayed in him. In other words, you're going to see this thing now, and his blindness is going to be taken away, and you would not have been able to witness this miracle and increase your faith, and all these people increase their faith and get to come to me had this man not been born blind. So sometimes the person goes through something because one day Yahweh is going to use that to glorify himself. I've often said that some people know what they're going to be and what they're going to do in life from an early age. I wasn't one of them. I'm still trying to figure it out, and I'm an old guy. Some people know that at a very young age, and some people figure it out later. And you know what? Some people don't know until they know, right? I've described, for example, people on 9/11. Okay, very traumatic time for the world, and particularly for the U.S. Right? And there were some people who were in positions of authority at that time, and I won't name specifics, but there were some people that they may have not done anything all their lives, but that day they were there, and that day they were prepared, and that day they made an incredible difference, and it changed the course of history. Sometimes you're here and you're in preparation. You're thinking you're obscure. It's like David in the wilderness, right? Where did David learn how to be king? He didn't learn how to be king. He didn't learn how to be king in Saul's court. In Saul's court, he was playing a lyre, or he was fleeing from spears, right? That's not where he learned to be king. I'll tell you where David learned how to be king. He learned how to be king with his flock in the middle of the wilderness. He learned how to be a defender and a warrior, dealing with the wolves. And not the wolves, the dealing with the lions and the bears. I added a wolf to the story. Legend grows. Bears, lions, right? Possible marauders trying to get to the sheep. That's how we learn how to be king. Doing order, learning what it is to do order, learning how it is to develop endurance and to develop strength. He learned it working with the Saul's men out in their training camps where they were using the slings. It talks about that, and you have to look for that carefully. But he learned how to use a sling from those people who are expert slingers, and on we could go. He didn't learn it in the court. When did he need it? Well, he didn't have it right away. He was able to kill Goliath, but David, that wasn't enough. That didn't make him king. David spent quite a few years, 7 years, in fact, before he became 7 years in Judah. And then he spent, okay, I'm getting something wrong here. My point is that I'm not going to go into the details. I'll have to look everything up. It's been a while. But the point is that he was years in preparation. And none of that happened in an official, training program. He wasn't raised to be a king in a royal court. And that happens with human beings in general. You're prepared and you're prepared and you're prepared. And it's hard for us, right? Because we don't know. And when you don't know, you're thinking, what am I here for? What was I meant to do? Right? Do you ever envy the people who know when they're, a tadpole, I'm going to be a doctor, right? I look at people, I say, really? You were going to be a doctor when you were 3 years old? Yeah, I used to go around with a little stethoscope, right? Well, okay, more power to you. And they were, wouldn't you know, they grow up to be world-class surgeons, right? That's not me. I don't know about you. If you thought that what you're doing now is maybe you're still trying to figure it out, okay? But you know what? Yahweh knows. And the day comes that he needs you and you're ready, boom, you're ready to go. And this man who was blind, who knows how long, right? Well, we know because he says he saw a blind man from birth. So it's kind of interesting, the question, right? When you think about the illogic in the question, who sinned, this man or his parents? Well, think about it. If he's blind from birth, put 2 and 2 together, hello, right? He comes out of the womb, boom, sinner, blind. Think about that just a little bit, right? Which is why they add his parents, right? Well, maybe it was his parents. Maybe it was like Elihu thinks, oh, future sin. No, it was because when the time was right, Yahweh was going to use this man's life to do something great. And here it is, over 2,000 years later, and we're still reading about it. And he goes on and he keeps on speaking here, right? So we have to, and I can show you other examples as well, but for lack of time, I won't go there. But the point is that we don't know the reasons why people suffer and all that. So let's put that retribution principle to rest once and for all. Let's put it in a deep grave where it belongs, so that we can live our lives in a way that is honoring to Yahweh and not seeing people or ourselves with judgment and condemnation. Right? You want to see something nice? My last word on that topic, and then I'll move on and finish up here. This is nice. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Messiah Yahshua. There is now no condemnation for those who are in Messiah Yahshua. So why do we want to always bring condemnation upon people, other people or ourselves? And there's more context to that as you keep reading, but generally speaking, there's no condemnation for us. So why do we want to continue to bring condemnation? Okay, so just getting back to Job and just a few finishing thoughts. Like I said, there's so much more that can be spoken about the book of Job. Chapter 28. Let's take a look at that, and I'll give you my final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. So chapter 28 is the heart of this book. So Yahweh says, beginning with verse 20, where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? This is the narrator speaking. Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? Everyone was searching here for wisdom, right? This is what they all presumed to have. The 3 friends presumed to have wisdom. We're going to share our wisdom with you, Job. We're going to give you the skinny so that you can fix your situation. It wasn't enough to just sit with him and commiserate with them. They had to fix his situation, right? And Elihu, same thing. And in Job, I already explained what Job did. But the heart of all this was wisdom, right? None of you, all of you, in other words, all of your wisdom was inadequate. Everyone's wisdom was inadequate, including Job's. Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds in the sky. This goes along with what Yahweh said about the complexity of the world, right? You're trying to judge my justice. You can't even tell me what this animal, why this animal does what it does, or when this animal does this, or when the fields do that, or whatever, right? And the waters and how they work. You can't even explain the most minute of details of the creation. What makes you presume to think that you can understand my justice to govern the world and the complexities that go behind that. Where then does wisdom come from? Where are you going to find real wisdom? In Elihu? Where does understanding dwell? In Eliphaz? It's hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds in the sky. Destruction and death say only a rumor of it has reached our ears. We only heard a rumor of it. It's like the slightest rumor. We don't even know the reality of it. We know a rumor of wisdom, but we don't know the reality of it. Elohim understands the way to it. He's the one. He alone knows where it dwells. We're talking about wisdom here. For he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. By the way, there's similar language over in Proverbs 8, right? I won't read the whole thing, but let's just take a quick look at Proverbs 8, which is Lady Wisdom personified. Lady Wisdom personified. Does not wisdom call and understanding lift up her voice? On top of the heights beside the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand, right? To you I call, O men, understand prudence, understand wisdom. Down in verse 12, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. The fear of Yahweh is to hate evil. That's the best we can do, is to fear Yahweh, because what is the fear of Yahweh in the book of Proverbs? How does the rest of the verse go? It appears several times. The fear of Yahweh is what? Is the beginning of wisdom. The beginning, not fully wisdom. The fear of Yahweh, start there. That's the beginning of wisdom. If you fear him, and not fear in the sense of, oh, I'm afraid what you're going to do to me and crash down, but no, fear, reverence, the kind of feeling that you have, my friends, when you go and you look at the vastness of the ocean, right? During the Feast of Tabernacles, we often take a walk on the beach in Virginia Beach, and especially when that moon gets up really bright and you look out over that vast ocean, and do you ever tremble? I tremble because first of all, it's not a sight I see every day. And when I do see it, it's awesome to me. That's I think we use the word awesome too much in our culture today, right? It's become a byword. But awesome it means something, right? It means you're filled with awe, right? Awesome. It's something, not that you feel with it, that it's something that instigates, it fills you with awe. Awesome. That's the quality of it. To me, a sight like that is awesome. To me, when I see a starless night in a place where, you can't see that around here. There's too many lights in the cities and the suburbs. But if you're in a place where it's a starless night, and have you ever laid on your back and just looked up into the night sky, and standing up and you look up into the night sky, I felt literally, I felt weak need, because I say this is too awesome for me. It's like there's like a shiver that goes down my spine, because it's something that I'm not used to seeing. Whenever I'm in a situation like that, and most often happens in nature situations, we have like little hills here in Pennsylvania, but when you go out to the West and you go to a place like, in certain places like in Colorado and Oregon, and if you go off even further, you go out to Alaska. I remember the first time, the only time I went to Alaska, I went to Anchorage for a business trip. And I remember for the first time, I saw mountains that big. For some of you, it may not be a big deal because you may have lived in those kind of environments before. I never have. I'm a New York guy. I'm a city boy and living in the suburbs pretty much, I've since then. So the first time I went to why do I keep saying the first time? That's a little bit disconcerting to me. What does that mean? Anyway, when I went to Anchorage and I saw the mountains, I went to a restaurant, and I remember when I came out for the first time in that case, I saw it was like sunup for breakfast, and I saw the mountain in the distance. I literally froze, in my car in place, because the sight was overwhelming to me. That is the feeling, and we've all, I think, felt that at some point. That is the feeling of fear. That is the fear that's being described of Almighty Yahweh. It's like a thing that you say, oh my goodness, I don't even know what to do here. It's like Job that puts his hand to his mouth. That is what begins wisdom. It's not even the fullness of wisdom, it's what begins wisdom. And the fear of Yahweh is to hate evil, pride and arrogance and evil way, etc. And he talks wisdom, Lady Wisdom. It's wisdom personified. And the scholars refer to her, because it's referred to as a female, as Lady Wisdom, right? You get that in the first chapters of Proverbs. Lady Wisdom stands at the gates and she cries to the naive, come here and I'll teach you, and blah, blah, right? This is it. Kings reign by me, right? Those who love me do great, and Yahweh possessed me at the beginning. From everlasting I was established, etc. And all this wisdom, personifies Yahshua, right? The conceptual metaphorical thing is Lady Wisdom, but it's just a metaphorical thing. Yahshua refers to Lady Wisdom in his writings, and we don't have time to go examine all these things, but it's a thread throughout Scripture. That is the basis upon which Yahweh governs the world. So when you go back to Job 28, Elohim understands the way to it, verse 23, and he alone knows where it dwells, for he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain, these are all things we see later in the chapters when Yahweh talks to Job. When he made a decree for the rain, the path of the thunderstorm, then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And he said to the human race, the fear of Yahweh, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. And then it goes on. So it's like a pause in the middle of all this. Just it's almost as if to say, you know what, I'm going to give you the answer to all this. I'm going to give you the key to all this. And now let's see the rest of the story, how it plays out. And then it comes to its full fulfillment and culmination at the very end. So you want to know what, in other words, you want to know the operating principle upon which the world is built? It's this, it's wisdom, my wisdom, a wisdom which you do not fully understand. And the best that you can do is fear me and do as I say in loving, trusting obedience. And the rest will follow because I'll take care of the rest. That's essentially what the message is. Okay. All right. There's much more that we could say about the book of Job, but I think that about is the sum total.